Hello there everybody, Shrouded Hand here. I'm going to do another trip report reading video, but before I begin, as a disclaimer, this is not intended as an encouragement or endorsement of drug use. It's not in my intention to glamorize it in any way. On the flip side of that, I am also not intending to demonize drug use. Because this is a horror channel after all, I'm picking bad experiences. So just to be clear, I'm not encouraging and I'm not demonizing, I'm just reading other people's experiences. Anyway, on with the reports. This story comes from Psychedelic Fan. So I wanted a trip, voyage, flight, whatever you want to call it. I'm a 21-year-old college student. Acid and shrooms were a thing of the past when I heard about DMT brew. I researched and read, then researched some more, as I always do, just to make sure. I found a site that sold the ingredients I needed. I boiled 2 grams of Syrian rue for about an hour in some water with some vinegar. I ended up with the piss yellow brew that was easy to get down. Then I began gulping the Mimosa Hostilis tea with about 2 grams of Syrian rue and chasing it with some peach juice. This was about the hardest thing for me to ever get down. It tastes so bad to me. After getting all of it down over about 15 minutes, the nausea began to kick in. I ran to the bathroom a few times but held it down. I loaded a bowl and smoked some dro to help with this, then put in a movie and waited about an hour and a half. It hit me like the flip of a switch. The floor began moving underneath my coffee table. I looked over at my girlfriend as her face had translucent patterns and tribal marks spinning and rotating on her face. Her iris were changing colours and spinning in the opposite direction of the patterns on her face. Her hair spiked up into the air and grew tall right before my eyes. She no longer was my girlfriend, but the spiritual shaman that was introducing me into this world. The walls were breathing all around me, and it was hard to focus on anything. I got up and went across to my computer. I attempted to look for a song on my mind, but the titles and artists were changing sizes and coming in and out of the screen. It was impossible to focus and remember what I was doing. I went back to bed and tried to converse with my lover. About an hour later, my girlfriend, who was sober, had given up on me by this time. I guess I didn't make any sense, and I told her I could no longer look at her because the shaman kept coming back and showing himself to me. I began getting very, very cold, shaking like I was outside in the snow for hours. My lover was no longer stoned and falling asleep very fast. I started to trip at the flip of a switch. I didn't feel good at all. I simply felt horrible. Not seeing anything, only the horrible cold feeling coming from within my soul. I made a trip to the bathroom and puked some bile and dry heaved the rest of the time for some minutes. One of the saliva clumps formed into a lizard and swam across the toilet water, then disappeared into 1,000 particles. I remember having to really make my body get up and move into the other room, or I would have been stuck there forever. I lay down and started to calm down, closing my eyes. The next thing I remember is feeling like I couldn't fall asleep because if I did, I would never wake up again. A Tim Burton clay creature with 10 long hind legs, striped with black and white, crawled into my mind and laughed at me. He was a disgusting, evil creature with green light shining out of every orifice in his head. He was bruised and had sores throughout his entire body. He crawled like the Exorcist girl crawled down a staircase, unnatural and disjointed. I knew at this point that I wanted to be normal, but would I be normal ever again? He crawled around showing me my family and how I was to be. A schizophrenic zombie, a waste to society, a waste to the meaning of value and life. I looked at the clock and it read 10:47. Only a few minutes have passed and I knew I had many hours to go. I began trying to change my pathway of thinking, staring straight at the wall ahead of me, letting go and taking the voyage I'd been desiring. After dry heaving and returning to my bed once again, I felt normal. I thought to myself I most likely just came through the second wave of the trip. I decided not to stare at the wall, afraid of what was to come next. I put on the movie Obsessed. It was about 11:15 by now. A few minutes into the movie, I felt it coming back. At this point, I was telling myself over and over just to ride it out and that time was on your side. I was back in complete darkness, feeling absolutely crazy. I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't see or envision anything but dark and loneliness. I felt the creature that kept haunting me so close by, so I stared at the movie and wondered if I would ever feel the same again. 12:26 a.m. I felt paralysed. I didn't want to move, and it didn't seem like I could. My eyes no longer could make anything out. Everything around me was blurry, and when I closed them, the darkness slowly approached me again. My girlfriend stretched out her leg and met with the side of my body. I was in the jungle with her now. We were travelling through the lands searching for something. This was like watching a movie in my head. As we continued through the vast scenery, I followed my lover into a clearing with a very soft fire. No flame, just smoke, but still going, if that makes any sense. There were some eyes in the trees looking over us. Out of nowhere, a baby is lifted up above the gentle smoking fire. There is a celebration within my body, within the clearing. I should no longer feel the darkness I mentioned before. Just as the darkness feeling leaves, the Tim Burton creature again crawled out into view. The jungle disappeared and blackness came around me, almost as if he was reminding me who was in charge and how I should feel. The horrible dark feeling came over me again, feeling sick and heading to the toilet. I must have been in the bathroom for some time, or must have blacked out, because the next thing I remember I was in bed, paralysed again, feeling very lonely and uncomfortable. I turned and looked at the clock and it read 2-something a.m. I felt it come back. At this point I was getting used to the shuffled mindsets, feeling absolutely crazy. My movements were uncontrolled, jerking my head all around every direction I wanted to look. I'm surprised I didn't give myself whiplash. My eyes then focused on the cat Luna. She is a long-haired black cat with some white. I reached out to pet her as she lay on the foot of my bed. Her coat was ashy and grey. Ashes floated off into the air as I pet her. She looked so old it freaked me out a bit. Then the sickness hit me again. I was so tired of throwing up and I just wanted it all to be over. Around 3:30 a.m, after throwing up for the last time, I returned to my bed and noticed some colour changes in the movie that had started over by this time. I looked at the clock and it read 3:17. I knew that I was finally starting to come down. Although the dark, lonely feeling continued, it was not as intense. I turned off the television and rolled on my back, looking at the ceiling for some time. It was almost 5 a.m. now, and I was sane enough to go to sleep. I closed my eyes and tried to put all the things I experienced into my memory to share in the morning. I woke up around 7:15 a.m. and was still high but not tripping at all. I was so glad to be back in the world that I'm used to. This report comes from Thompson. I'm a 23-year-old male, but I had this experience over 2 years ago. I had tried ayahuasca once before. That experience was quite intense but short. The trip only lasted about half an hour, and that half an hour was beautiful. Then came the time of my second experience. The set and setting was not the best possible one. I was not in a very good mood and not too eager when the time came to drink the brew. I'd measured the ingredients so that it shouldn't be too strong. The taste was awful, but I got it down. Also, my friend was taking this, and my girlfriend was to be the trip sitter. My friend had some problems drinking it and vomited part of it before it was in her stomach. Maybe that's the reason why she had, only for a short time, a very mild experience. For me, the nausea hit right after drinking. Then I went to the bedroom where I could be alone. I had a bucket with me for vomiting. When I was on all fours, I started puking. First I thought the only thing I could get from this is nausea. There were no other effects yet. Then suddenly it hit me. My perception changed completely. I felt like I was a lizard and I had become one with the floor. I saw visuals everywhere. By that point I decided to go to the bathroom. In the hallway I tried to say something to the girls, but I was not able to make any words. I knew that this was not going to end well. I felt a bad trip coming. After managing to get to the toilet, I puked several times. The toilet seat was laughing at me and looking very perverse. My surroundings were not so visual anymore. There was only a grim shade of something evil. After that, I fully lost my grip with reality. This was the first time for me to be tripping so hard that I didn't even know that I was tripping. My girlfriend said that I had been swimming in the bathroom floor. After a while I started to tremble. These two girls had to sit on me to keep me still. I couldn't bear any light, or I started to tremble even more. My eyes were not like a human's at all. I kept saying very evil and perverse things and screaming like in terrible pain. I bite them and myself and tore everything with my hands. For 2 hours the girls had to sit on me, and from this whole time I had no recollection. First thing I remember is that I was being torn apart from my skin and mind, physically and mentally. The more I fought against it, the harder it fought me. Then I understood to give up and it eased for a while, but this loop continued, fighting harder and giving up easier. I felt like it was going on forever. I felt very dirty physically and in my mind. Next I was laying on the floor in a pool of my own blood, which I thought was coming from my nose. I thought that I was dying. It got even worse when my mind told me that this death of mine caused the end of the whole universe. All seemed to be collapsing, and at the same time I was torn apart. I felt like everything would be destroyed and it was my fault. I cried and screamed and felt like it would never end. Perhaps after 4 hours of this hell, I started to come down. I never felt so relieved that I'd started to understand that reality is here and this trip was finally over. I seemed to be alive. There was no blood, nothing dirty, all that was just in my head. I was so tired and relieved and so happy to be alive again. Just moments ago I was certain that I was dead. The next day all three of us were covered in bruises. I looked like I'd been in a fight, and my girlfriend had traces of my teeth on her hand. This was the worst trip that I'd ever had, and a few hours of such hell that I have never experienced anything even near it. Now it's 2 years since, and when I think of this experience I feel uneasy and I feel like there's vomit in my throat. This report comes from Psycho Hippie. My boyfriend, my best friend, and I decided to brew ayahuasca and take it so that we could get our weekly fill of inner exploration. It was around 8 PM and all three of us decided to take our 4 inhibitor capsules on our shot glass of tea. Then we went out into the bedroom filled with blankets and trip toys to wait for the purge. After about 25 minutes my boyfriend started to feel sick and he vomited. Then about 10 minutes after that my best friend threw up as well. But not me. I waited and waited and waited. After an hour had passed, we all became concerned that I hadn't vomited yet. So my friend and I went to the restroom where I forced myself to throw up. While I was puking, my friend was staring in the mirror, saying her nose was turning orange. Unfortunately, that was as far as her trip would take her. After that point, she didn't experience anything else. After this, my boyfriend and I felt a sort of body high, but that was it. Then by 9:30 his trip had ended, just like my friends did. I'll never understand why. We went into the living room to watch Futurama. I began to see squiggly lines coming at me from all directions, but I just sat there and stayed quiet. My boyfriend and my friend assumed my trip had ended like theirs did, but they were so wrong. Finally, around midnight, my boyfriend and I went into our bedroom and my friend went to sleep on the couch. I noticed I was having trouble walking straight and I was still seeing squiggly lines. This is when I realised something strange was happening and I was still tripping. I was lying in bed with my boyfriend and he decided he wanted to get intimate. He didn't realise that I was completely unaware of what was happening. Right in the middle of our intimacy, I busted out crying and sobbing. My boyfriend couldn't understand why I was like this, because he still didn't know I was on a trip. Then after about an hour of crying, things got really bad. I was talking to my boyfriend and then nothing made sense in my head. I couldn't think. I was stuck in this sort of insane thought loop thing. My thoughts would not make sense in my head, but apparently I spoke as if it did make sense. I felt like I was a mentally retarded person stuck in a body. I could see the outside world, but I couldn't communicate with it. Like I said, it was literally an insane thought loop. Finally, I was able to get through to my boyfriend that I thought I was perma-fried. Honestly, I thought I was going to be stuck in that loop for the rest of my life. I thought I would be in a mental home before long and that I'd die in that condition. Then I felt bugs crawling all over my body. Meantime, I felt like a game of Tetris was going on in my brain. It was very difficult to explain. I had to pee, so I crawled to the bathroom, and when I got there I forgot what I was doing. I sat on the bathroom floor wondering what I was supposed to do. I couldn't figure out what toilet paper was or what it was for. Then I forgot what I was and what I was for. I think I thought I was a tile or something. Finally I remembered how to pee, and so I did, and I wiped with toilet paper, but I didn't remember you were supposed to flush it, so I stuffed it under the sink. Gross, I know, but I had no control. Then I went back to the bedroom and dripped piss on my boyfriend by accident. By this point he already knew there was something very wrong. I wanted to go to the hospital, but I couldn't put my thoughts together well enough to articulate a sentence to him. I was freaking out because I thought I was stuck in that condition because it was already 5 AM and I'd been tripping for 9 hours. I wanted to sleep, but there was no way possible. My eyes wouldn't stay shut for more than 2 seconds. My boyfriend fed me some charcoal pills to try and get the tea out of my system faster, but it didn't help much. I can literally say I know what it feels like to be mentally insane. I was stuck on that trip until late afternoon the next day. Then I slept for a few hours and thanked a higher being that I'd come back. I don't think I'll be doing ayahuasca again for a long time. Next time I might not get so lucky as to come back. This report comes from R. Quetzali. Almost a year ago, in November 2016, I was invited to partake in the ceremonial drinking of ayahuasca where I reside in Canada. It was 2 ceremonies, both conducted under an ayahuasquero who was trained with a well-known Peruvian shaman. I had researched ayahuasca for several years and read many positive reviews of people healing or moving through blocks in life. I had not read anything regarding the risks of negative outcomes or the development of psychological disorders post-use. I had a fairly healthy life. I didn't do any other drugs beside the occasional marijuana edible. I wasn't on any medications. I'd had some anxiety and depression over the course of my life, but never needing to be medicated. I was very curious about this medicine and took the offer when invited. The day came and there were about 8 of us attending. The other attendees were doctors, counsellors and other health professionals, which added to my sense that there weren't any major risks associated with it. I followed the diet regimen and preparatory guidelines which needed to be followed 1 month before the ceremony. First ceremony was interesting. I was happy. I had many visuals that were interesting. Most I didn't understand. I saw alien creatures that seemed to be in a hurry to get somewhere. I saw a snake. It was distant from me and seemed to be checking me out but never coming near. Then towards the end of the ceremony something shifted. I started to feel a heaviness come over me and then a primal fear. Was I dying? I began to feel grotesque and my surroundings took on a darker tone, death and rot. I began to panic and ask for help. The shaman came over and sung an Icaron. I let out a deep-rooted purge that seemed to come from the very depth of my bowels. Instantly the panic and grotesque sensations disappeared. More relaxed, I lay there and drifted off to sleep. The next day I felt okay, but there was a slight anxiety that I had surfaced. I let the shaman know that I was feeling different, a little off with anxiety. She said it was okay to proceed with the ceremony and that I needed more work. The evening came and the second ceremony began. I drank the brew and lay on my mat and waited. Within 25 minutes I began to feel an intense surge of anxiety. I had not been thinking about anything, just calmly waiting for the effects to take place. The anxiety grew in magnitude and became so intense that I was having a hard time being still. Then I went into a fight or flight response. My heart was racing. I could feel the adrenaline running through me. I was panicking. I felt like I needed to leave immediately. I jumped up from my mat and ran out of the room. It felt like I was going insane. I couldn't calm myself. I went outside to the porch hoping the air would do me some good, but it didn't. I wanted to jump off the porch and to flee. I've never felt this kind of intense anxiety in my life. Someone from the group came out and checked on me. They saw the distress I was in and coaxed me back into the ceremonial space. The shaman did some work on me, and after some time I was beginning to settle down and laid back on my mat. Then some visuals started. They all had a dark tone. I began having auditory hallucinations. I heard someone speaking to me. The voice was saying things like, "You don't even believe yourself." The paranoia set in. I tried to surround myself with love, but everything good seemed to melt away. I started to feel distant from everything, lonely and hopeless. Then the grotesque rot death feeling started to surface again. I was feeling like I was dying. My body was heavy and limp. My hands and arms looked pale and ghastly. I was in a state of freeze and felt a fear that no human should ever feel. My surroundings looked like I was in some kind of death lodge with suffering all around me. My visuals turned to static and I started to feel like I had lost my mind. I kept getting up and going outside in an attempt to ground myself and breathe in the air whilst wishing the night was over. And finally it was. The next morning I woke up feeling disorientated. I was pretty shaken up by the experience, but I was glad it was over. I spoke to the shaman about what I'd experienced. They said I should start to feel better and that I'd been releasing traumas. Three days after the ceremony is when I became psychologically unwell. It started with panic attacks, body tremoring, nightmares, and surges of intense anxiety. I also had an intense ear ringing with noise sensitivity. I couldn't sleep or eat. Then the flashbacks started. I was re-experiencing that grotesque feeling of primal fear. I became more and more unwell, unable to cope. I was admitted for a few days at emergency psychological services in an acute stress response. They put me on benzodiazepines and sent me home. As the days went on, I didn't recover. I had to take leave from my job as I could no longer work. I continued to experience flashbacks, panic attacks, insomnia, extreme startle response and noise sensitivity. I couldn't go into crowds or drive, and I had a hard time talking with people. I started to see a psychiatrist who had experience with psychedelic drugs and research. After 4 months of dealing with these symptoms, I was diagnosed with psychedelic-induced PTSD. It's been a year and I've not got much better. In fact, some days I feel worse than my initial reaction. I continue to suffer on a daily basis with panic attacks, hallucinations, severe anxiety and agitation. I've tried a number of different therapies and medications, but so far I haven't recovered. I just pray that I recover from this one day. It's been a truly harrowing experience. November 2017 update. I was placed on an antipsychotic and my symptoms have gone away. I do have to continue to take my meds daily or the symptoms return. Okay, that's the last of the stories. I did find some other pretty good ones on other sites, but they were so long that if I narrated them, the video would be like 2 hours long or something. So I suppose if you want to read more, you can go and search for them yourself. One really common aspect of these trips seems to be the feeling that when you're in the depths of the bad part of the trip, that you're never going to come down again and you're going to be that way forever, which must be the scariest feeling. I know bad trips are scary, but at least usually there's a sense that you're going to come down eventually, but feeling like you're just going to be stuck in that position for the rest of your life must be absolutely horrible. So once again, I'm going to thank the Patreons. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do these shout outs at the end of the videos for much longer, because basically I didn't expect so many people to actually support me, so I really appreciate it. At the same time, it might take up too much time at the end of the video shouting out the names every time, so I'm going to maybe try and think up something else, maybe do it on a separate video and do something fun with it. I don't know, but anyway, I just wanted to say that, because if I don't shout you out on a future video, it's not because I don't appreciate it, it's just because I didn't expect to get so many people supporting me. So huge thanks to Anne Quiet, Brandon, Carla Hoffman, Kachika, Cheeky Jones, Christopher Morland, Claudia Moreira, Damon Smith, Diane M. Fields, Duct Tape Master, James Sorensen, Jim Knapp, Caden Comet Nelson, Marcus Cairo, Neo Pucky G, Rocket Guitarist, Sarah, Sib Princeton, Tootsie Tickler, and Vigard Bratton. And shout out to everyone who donated on PayPal: Simone Muller, Matthew Perotti, Richard Koch, Chris Bolland, Jack Keisto, Daniel Moore and Vladimir Thornton. I'm not really used to this whole Patreon thing. I used to have a Patreon years ago and I used to have like about 3 supporters on there, so I'm not used to this kind of support. It's kind of overwhelming, so yeah, I'll try and think of something, but I'm a bit new to this. So anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I've got 2 other trip report readings, so they should be on the screen now. Give them a click if you want to check them out. Okay, thanks everyone. Until next time, goodbye.